unfortunately, this is the parallels between game of chess and the modern geopolitics. It's very questionable because Putin's game is more of a poker, and he knows how to bluff.
This is not just the anniversary of the Berlin Wall's collapse. It's also the anniversary of your World Chess Championship.
I had this day to celebrate 4 years before collapse of Berlin Wall. November 9, 1985, I won my World Championship title in Moscow.
And we'd like to think that the two events are not unlinked. Talk a little bit about what are the enduring lessons of the fight against communism that we are in, 25 years, it seems a couple of worlds ago. What are the lessons that we're in the danger of losing from, long after the twilight of the Cold War?
I think we've forgotten many important lessons of the Cold War. I have to say that when I entered this field, in mid-80s as the newly born world champion, it was not as dangerous. So Gorbachev badly needed to reconcile with the West. The Soviet economy was in a terrible shape. The oil prices were sharply falling, thanks to the cooperation between Reagan's administration and Saudis. And it was absolutely clear even for Soviet Politburo that the arms race and in the competition against the United States on the global scale was no longer a plausible option. So Gorbachev tried hard, and he made several attempts to convince Ronald Reagan to accept some form of peace accord. And thanks to Reagan's intuition, despite the advice of all his administration, it's the State Department, the Pentagon, he said no in Reykjavik. And I think by saying no in Reykjavik, Reagan made perestroika and the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union inevitable at such a short period of time.
And of course, Reykjavik in chess also
it's a symbolic place. In 1972, right. Bobby Fischer beat Boris Spassky. So that was another sort of the big victory of the free world in the Cold War.
No, and thereby condemning all of us in grammar school in the 70s to joining chess clubs, as a matter of fact. What was it like to grow up in the Soviet system? And you were in a relatively privileged position, but can you talk a little bit about
when you say relatively privileged because of my chess status? Yes.
But what was it like, and what was the psychological effect on yourself or people around you?
I think certain things is very hard to describe because to understand them, you have to live with them. So I was always amazed, to hear comparisons in America or Western Europe about Soviet Union and certain wrongdoings of the governments in the free world, just without recognizing that, Soviet Union just was a dictatorship. And I grew up in the late 60s, 70s, early 80s as a teenager, and of course I haven't experienced the horrors of the Stalin's time. But, it was still the country that was not free, and thanks to my ability to play chess and the fact is that I was a chess prodigy, I could start traveling abroad. So my first trip to France was when I was 13, and it was quite a shocking experience.
Well, what was
shocking experience about it? That I don't think that in my family, and I'm not talking about just just very few people, but just like extended family, that's cousins, and also among my friends, there was no single person who ever visited a capitalist country. So at age 13, I became I carried sort of a sacred knowledge of how people live there, just on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So people, knew that there was another world. They could, of course, read some literature that was officially banned, but you could buy it. They could listen to Radio Liberty or Voice of America, BBC, and there was no more. You couldn't find hard believers in a communist regime, so it was all dying down. So my grandfather, my mother's mother, he was a diehard communist. He died in 1981, and the last couple of years we had big debates because I was already 17, 18, and we were talking about Afghanistan and other things, and And he was shocked because he couldn't understand why, after him spending 50 years in the Communist Party, he had to line up to buy, butter and bread. So that's for him, it was mind-boggling. So something went wrong. So that's why the collapse of the communist system was somehow already, imminent. And I think that Gorbachev's plan was not to remove communism, but actually to create something more plausible without giving up the role of the Communist Party.
Do you think that in the end that there's no way to do that? That, I mean, you can't get it's kind of like being a little bit pregnant. If you give people a little bit freedom, it's going to collapse?
Yeah, I think so.
Which I realize,
no, but
don't follow that illusion all the way, but...
No, but I don't think that, you can divide people, genetically, saying these nations are not ready to embrace democracy. And I hear these arguments about Russia or about China. But look, you have two Koreas. If you look at the North, I mean, you can come up with a conclusion that Koreans are born to be slaves, and they live in Gulag. Unless you are aware that there's a South Korea, one of the most flourishing economies in Asia, and again, it's a democracy and market economy. So and also in China, you have China on one side, but you have Taiwan. So it's a rocky island with the same people. And I'm not even mentioning two Germanys. So I think that people have the same aspirations. They want to be successful. They want their kids to have good education. They want to spend some money, to have vacation in a decent place. The moment they're given this opportunity, I don't think you can force them back to the communist stable.
Well, as Tom was bringing up, you've been very forward and very courageous in speaking out against Putin and other forms of dictatorship, creeping fascism, corporatism. You're very critical of the West's engagement with countries with Putin, with China. What do you think is wrong about the way that the West? You've written that we're willing to trade with them, but we don't draw a line when they obviate civil liberties, when they continue to act repressively. How should we be engaging them? Those of us in the free world.
It's a long story, but since today we are talking about the Berlin Wall, so we have to go back to the 1989, 1990, 91. And it was a great moment in history. So everybody was
a lot younger.
Don't mention that. So we believe that it was all over. If in August 1991, anybody could say in Moscow or outside of Soviet Union, that 9 years later, the KGB lieutenant colonel would be the president of Russia, I think this person would people would be laughing. So it was really impossible to believe that, after all these changes, we can go back. But I think the results of the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were probably misread, both inside former Soviet Union and also outside. So in 1992, one of the bestsellers was The End of History by Francis Fukuyama. The end of history, the liberal democracy has won, that's it. And I think, this book ignored the fact that, that's every generation, has to fight its own Berlin Wall. As Ronald Reagan said, the freedom is always one generation away from extinction. So there's no physical Berlin Wall, but there are walls. Right. And the problem of the Soviet Union specifically, was that unlike Germany, or Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan, there was no process of sort of cleansing process. Right. So the society couldn't feel responsibility for the communist crimes. So for the Russians was, okay, that's over, and same as in 1918, in Germany. We lost the war, but maybe somebody betrayed us. And, it's while we had some good moments in the 90s under Yeltsin, but you could feel even in the 90s that the building or trying to build, the system similar to the free world, so with parliament, with presidential power, with checks and balances, with independent court system, they failed. Because Russian people believe that, all they needed is just, to have this, the voting procedure, And if we implement that, it will immediately lead to the dramatic improvement in living standards. So irony is that nobody could see an improvement in the 90s, or okay, majority couldn't see it. While when Putin took over, thanks to the high oil prices, suddenly life improved. And in the mind, it's a very odd connection. But in the minds of many ordinary people, wow, that's a democracy. So that's because we feel some improvement.
And then they feel loyalty to Putin rather than to democratic institutions or market institutions.
Again,
How much of the problem with Russia is specifically a problem with Putin? You've written, that distinct from the Soviet Union, it is about him. He's building a cult of personality, or where the state revolves around him. You wrote about the Sochi Olympics, that it was a glorification of him, similar to the way the Berlin Olympics were. So if Putin is gone, does the trouble go away from within Russia, or what needs to happen within the country?
Look, if dictator goes away, I mean, it doesn't happen through the normal, election process. So that's why you can expect a turmoil. Yeah. So most likely uprising in Moscow, in the capital. It will not end up, with very peaceful resolution. So because political opposition has been destroyed, and I don't think you can have anything worse than Putin. I mean, just all these threats that Putin is the last sort of line of defense, and if not Putin, no, Putin is the main problem. Mm-hmm. Putin is a paranoid, aging dictator who believes he is Russia, same way Hitler believed he was Germany, mm-hmm. And it's not surprising that now Kremlin propaganda has been repeating sort of the classical formula. Hitler is Germany, Germany is Hitler. Now Putin is Russia, Russia is Putin. It's extremely dangerous because for him, his own collapse means the collapse of the country. And unlike Hitler, he has his finger on the nuclear button. He's by far more dangerous threat to world peace because Russia today is not as old Soviet Union or not modern China. It's not ideological dictatorship with Politburo, Central Committee of the Communist Party. It's one-man dictatorship. It means that this man, if he believes he is the country, he can do whatever.
So how should the West, or the free world, the OECD countries, NATO, the US, what should they be doing differently in dealing with Putin? Because, I mean, you're not talking about military engagement, but you have written a lot about economic engagement and other types of trade policy and things like that. What are good ways to to kind of bring Putin to heel?
Look, this problem is not. We have been facing this problem for quite a while, and there's so many mistakes that have been made, and those mistakes created an impression for Putin and his cronies, and also some of his clients like Assad and others in the world, Iranian ayatollahs, that the West is weak. The West is not willing to get engaged. So the West will give them anything they want. So before we talk about, the right strategy, what the free world, what the leaders of the free world must do, I mean, let's start talking about what they must not do. I mean, you cannot project weakness. Yes, I know that America will never consider seriously boots on the ground in Ukraine. Why you are talking about it? Why you say publicly you will not do that? So who is forcing you? Yes, and I could start you giving many examples where just, they violate the simplest rules of negotiations. Now the secret letter from Obama to Ayatollahs, without mentioning the fact that, it's an insult for the Sunni allies. And it's the first time that the United States and the free world had a great chance of creating a Sunni coalition to stop Sunnis terror. Now, and, stabbing them in the back by writing a letter to Ayatollah. By the way, this is not the first letter. They never responded. And now, at the time when the nuclear deal is about to be reached or not, I mean, he's asking them to help in ISIS. ISIS will be destroyed. You need probably more planes, maybe some soldiers, bring, it's material resources. ISIS is not a global threat, so it's very local. And for the sake of Iranian cooperation, this relatively small issue, to put, at stake, the global cooperation with Sunnis and also the non-proliferation policies, that's exactly what you're not supposed to do.
You've written about how, starting with under Clinton as well as under George W. Bush and under Barack Obama, you talked about Bush being reckless, Obama being aimless. Who are the Western leaders, you think, that are heads of state who have actually articulated a post-Cold War framework for kind of spreading democracy and market liberalism?
I don't think that any Western leader even thought about doing that because, again, the mood was we won. Yeah, it's many people talk about, let's say, Clinton's presidency as a great success. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt certain, the achievements in economy here, but geopolitically it was the greatest disaster among all because it's not about the final position. Like we look at the chessboard and you say, oh, I'm still at winning position. Yes, but you missed mate in 5 times in a row. The game is still on. So in 1992, America was all-powerful. It could design the world map the way it wanted. In 2000, Al-Qaeda was ready to strike. So what's happened in these 8 years? So 8 years of complacency, of doing nothing. So nobody formulated policies for Russia, for former Soviet Union, for Islamic terrorism. It requires, the global vision. The same way as Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, had these policies designed in 1946, 47, Marshall Plan. They were plans. They learned from the World War II, and they knew that, to oppose Stalin and to oppose communism, they needed to come up, with a plan, strategy, and also leadership. When I hear about potential dangers of confronting Putin today, my first question is he more dangerous than Joseph Stalin in 1948? For 11 months, American and British planes have been supplying West Berlin, besieged by Stalin troops. And Joseph Stalin hasn't shot a single American plane. Why? Because Harry Truman already used nuclear weapons. And Stalin, as every good dictator, had this animal instinct. He knew where he could be repulsed. So he knew that Harry Truman would not play a game. It happened in 1962 when Khrushchev recognized that he pushed JFK to the ropes, and Ronald Reagan. And don't tell me that the Soviet Union in 1981, 82, 83 was less powerful than Putin's Russia today.
You have written recently about how America is hugely important in the world and that America needs a strong economy and that economic force will help change, it will help spread democracy and freedom markets throughout the world. You've talked about how people in America don't seem to have the kind of bold sense of vision, of innovation, of change. Can you talk a little bit about that? What happened to that? The idea that we're going to reinvent the world.
No, I wish I knew. So you can just look at the literature. So this is 50s, 60s. Science fiction was one of the most popular genre. It has disappeared. Now it's either you talk about elves and magic, or it's dystopia. It's just, or you talk about machines attacking us. So there's no more positive vision of machines cooperating.
Now, let me push back on that though, because you talk about 40 years ago,
50 years ago,
since then, I mean, we've had things like the internet. We've had things like fracking, which has totally undermined Russia's ability to dictate oil prices.
Okay,
I mean, I mean, does anybody here think that the world is less good?
Wait. Let's be very specific. Okay. You mentioned internet. Okay. It's a result of the space race. The foundation for internet was created, designed, and eventually developed by the scientists from DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, in 1962 and 1963. So that's from packet switching to the full description of every element, including Skype. And in 1969, the first signal came for ARPANET from UCLA to Stanford.
So are you saying
this is what you're talking today? It's WWW, the World War Net,
right.
is commercial application of technology that has been developed 20 years before.
Which also is the thing that makes it transformative, though.
Yes, I know, but we're talking about breakthrough technology.
So do we need another Cold War? Do we need, because that's also talking, is that what we need, a kind of regimented goal that society is moving towards?
It's 50, it's in 2012, 50 years after the JFK speech in the Rice University about this moon project. America had no more rockets, just no more means to actually send its astronauts into the space. They had to use Russian. By the way, also built, in the 60s and 70s. So I think it constitutes a disaster, scientific disaster, because space projects are important not just for the sake of landing on Moon or Mars, because of the side effect. As we had GPS, we had internet, and many other things that have been developed, alongside with the space project. So, for instance, just expedition to Mars, which, has probably 50-50 chance of safe return of the crew, will force us to do more work on the diet, on the medicine. And while today, people here, I'm sure in the room know much better than I do, what are the chances of introducing a new drug? So if you have 1 out of 1,000, the rate of failure, you're out of production. Now, if you produce new drugs or new food for the expedition with 50-50 chance of return, then 1 out of 3 is already good. So it's very important that we have these projects to energize a society and not to eliminate risk. Because it seems to me that risk now, it's as we teach kids from the school that failure is nothing but failure. If you fail, you are a failure. No, I believe that failure is a way. It's a logical move on your way to success.
Well, as somebody who fails more often than I succeed, I feel much better at the end of this conversation. Look, we were talking earlier in the evening. You said that there's a huge amount of complacency, kind of in what used to be called the free world. Does that? Is this kind of a Marxist analysis of capitalism that we kind of get fat and lazy because things come easily after a certain point, and we fall into an inability to actually take the kinds of risk or create the kind of innovations that actually will push us forward?
It's, again, probably, the free world needs challenges. Definitely wars or Cold War, there were challenges. We don't want to see these challenges again, but it's natural that, we have to recognize that, the real innovations is not iPhone 6, it's Apollo 6. There's a fundamental difference. And it seems to me that, again, we have multinational corporations that are now sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars of cash without investing them in new ideas. So I understand paying shareholders is important, but creating new values is probably more important.
All right, and at that point, we're going to turn it over to some questions. And also, by the way, if any of you are sitting on billions of dollars of cash, I do want to point out that both Atlas and Reason are 501c3s, and so you can take. But so let's go to questions, please.
So I asked you earlier, privately, sir, why you played the Sicilian defense to win your first World Chess Championship. And you declined to answer. And so I just want to ask that question publicly. And then I want to ask you how you would apply that to the global scene today.
Okay, it's the...
And for those of us who only play checkers,
it doesn't matter.
what is the Sicilian defense?
It doesn't matter. It was a game that, I was leading 12-11. Karpov had to win the game. He played with white, because he started the game, to retain the title. So I could be happy with a draw. Now, the question is why I played very sharp opening instead of trying to play very defensive. Now, the answer is very simple. When you reach the climax of any battle, you'd better be in the situation that fits your nature. So I was much more comfortable in sharp position. It doesn't matter. We play a game. And, I could win, I could lose, it could be a draw, but I'm comfortable. And my calculation was right, because at the crucial moment of the game, Karpov had to push, had to make a sacrifice, but it was against his nature. He tried to improve his position, he wasted time, and eventually I could, create a powerful counterattack. So same, in politics, you have to play the game that fits your strengths. So, and again, there's so many arguments. There's so many trump cards in the hands of the free world, and you have to start using them. So what game did you play? I played the game of chess. Yes. Unfortunately, this is the parallels between game of chess and the modern geopolitics. It's very questionable, because Putin's game is more of a poker, and he knows how to bluff, and that's poker. And he normally has a very weak hand. I would say pair of 9. But he bluffs. And he knows that, his opposition always, try to fold out the cards. So once I said that, if Putin has this, pair of whatever, 8, 9, or 10, and he acts as if he has a flash royale. And Obama has a full house, and he flashed it in the toilet.
Here, let me ask you, I mean, do you believe that Putin would be expansionary beyond the confines of the former Soviet Union? And then what is the challenge that is posed by a country like China? Is it similar in kind to the Russian challenge, or is it something very different?
No, I think that the nature of Putin's challenge today is very much domestic. He has a fundamental problem of finding the rationale for staying in power. He's in power for 15 years. And every dictator who is not relying on democratic institutions must come up with a story, a myth, an idea. Why the hell you're there? So this is, for many young Russians, it's a question. So economy doesn't offer any more excuses. So to the contrary, it all goes down. So the Russian middle class that used to see gradual improvements in the living standards, and it's all in money, in perks, in ability to travel around. So communications. Suddenly they just recognize that it all could, disappear. Now Putin's only rationale is to present himself as a big hero, Vladimir the Great, the collector of Russian lands. So Putin, the man who is restoring the Russian Empire. Again, for him, it's the main audience is inside the country. The propaganda, and I could still hear it by listening to Russian television or just reading the press. It's worse than Dr. Goebbels. It's oral. It's war is peace, slavery is freedom, 24/7. It's anti-American, and they keep talking about horrible things as even using nuclear weapons. Even Putin himself, at his latest speech, praised Nikita Khrushchev for making these threats. It's almost quote unquote when he said that Khrushchev, he acted like a crazy man, banging with his shoe at the United Nations, but everybody respected him because they knew he was crazy, and they were afraid that he would throw nuclear missiles at them. That's literally quote unquote. Now, combine it with his clear statement that all the borders of the former Soviet Union, so they are in question. So that's why he believes that Russia was in its right to challenge Ukrainian borders and others as well. Now the question is whether he could attack Estonia and Latvia, the members of NATO, Article 5. My answer is he might do that because he doesn't have to start open invasion. He could provoke violence in the Russian enclaves in Estonia or in Latvia, and then you could see some volunteers crossing the border. At the end of the day, it's not about invading Latvia and Estonia. It's all about undermining NATO. Obama had a big speech in Tallinn, claiming that the United States would be behind Estonia. Nice. Next day, Russian intelligence kidnapped an Estonian officer from Estonian territory, dragged him into Russia. He's now in a Russian jail, awaiting for a trial for espionage. Next day. Why? Just to show that no protection. So it's all about undermining Western institutions and NATO and demonstrating that the United States is a paper tiger, it's an empty shell.